All right, we're recording now. I am so incredibly pleased and incredibly thankful that we have this amazing panel to share with you all today. We're going to have 3 talks by 3 PhD anthropology students. We're going to start off with Liz Croker, who received her PhD in 2017. Then we'll have a talk by Chris Taylor, received his PhD in 2015. And finally, Chloe Mulderig, who received her PhD in 2015. So they're all going to share a lot of their journey since that point. So I won't waste any of your time in introductions and just hand it right over to Liz Croker.
Great. Let me share my screen real quick. And present. All right. I'm going to make that myself small so I don't get distracted by staring at myself. But all right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm excited. Like she said, my name is Liz Croker. I graduated in 2017, and I jumped right from grad school into working at science societies. And this was not a career path I knew anything about. I had never thought about working for science societies, didn't even know what they really did or what kinds of jobs were available there. So I thought it'd be great to sort of go through a little bit about where I'm coming from, what my skill sets were, what I brought with me into the job market, and then what kinds of things I do in science societies. And then I'm going to give some tips and suggestions for how to market yourself to the sort of nonprofit sector. How do you turn a CV into a resume, with just a few suggestions of different topics. So when I was in grad school, my research for my dissertation was about Haitian voodoo saints in Haiti and the greater Boston area, looking at things like race, gender identity, sacred geographies, authenticity. There's some pictures here of some of my field work. But I was also doing some other things. My funding ran out, as my advisor can tell you. I was in grad school for way too long, and I ended up needing to find additional funding. So I was over in the Division of Emerging Media Studies in School of Communications at Boston University. And there we did some original research and publications and conferences, and I co-taught some courses on emerging media studies. So like internet, cell phones, video games, those kinds of topics. On the side, I was also volunteering. And so I volunteered with some public engagement opportunities. I helped run a large forum for scientists and the general public to talk about new research. This is just a screenshot from excuse me, from an article about me as a moderator. And Cheryl Knott was very she's a good sport, and she was willing to do an AMA and have a journalist come in and watch us for like the entire 3 hours that we did this AMA and record it and write up an article about it. And then I was also the communications director for March for Science Boston, which was a lot of fun, but a lot to also do right as I was getting ready to graduate. That happened in April of 2017, and I had defended my dissertation just a couple weeks prior to the event and graduating in May. And with all of this, one of the challenges I found was that it was spring 2017. I was getting ready to graduate, and it was becoming rather clear that I hadn't gotten a postdoc. And I knew that the cycle was that most of new postdocs would open up in the summer and in the fall, and I would apply for those. And by the time you go through the interview process, you actually get it and would start, a lot of times those wouldn't be until fall 2018. And, I have a kid, I need to pay rent. My student loans are going to come due. I have to have a job. So what am I going to do? Well, one of the opportunities that came up when I was a grad student was that the American Association for the Advancement of Science invited someone from our moderation team to come and give a presentation at their annual meeting in Boston in February of 2017 about how to do public engagement online. And because I was the person in Boston, I got pinged to be the person who was able to go to this conference and give the talk. And so I did. It was a lot of fun. And while I was there, I was wondering, well, this is cool because there's science from all over. I mean, NASA was there and people were giving presentations about genetics. There was a whole anthropology section at AAAS. I wonder if they have any jobs. So I started looking in this science society space that I had never thought about before. because a lot of them have more than just conferences and journals. They actually have tons of different grant-funded programs that they run. And what I found was a really cool job in the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program. So the job I was hired to do, I applied and I got it, was to help co-develop a workshop to teach scientists with a specific focus on natural scientists, but really all scientists, and that includes social scientists, to teach them how to think about and consider culture, identity, and religion when they're going in to do public engagement. AAAS had encountered people coming to them and saying, like, all these general SciComm tips are great, but I'm trying to teach about human evolution in Alabama, and I'm running into some problems. And they didn't feel like the toolkits that were out there were really sufficient to help them navigate some of these really tense, like high intensity situations, especially when faith became something that was perceived, especially by the scientists, as a barrier to communicating. And so the workshop we developed teaches about religion as a lived religion, and culture and identity, and how to approach people from different perspectives and backgrounds, and to sort of bring down the temperature in the room and have a productive dialogue. We did public presentations, we created all these toolkits. This website has a lot of those toolkits, interviews, case studies, things like that on there. We held events. On the top, you see me doing a workshop presentation for a bunch of scientists about doing this workshop. And on the bottom, one of the many science societies that we went to doing this workshop and other kinds of activities was the American Association for Biological Anthropology. At the time, it was physical anthropology. And I was one of the people who gave a talk specifically about anthropology and public advocacy. But Cheryl Knott was also another good sport for this. And she gave a talk as part of our all-day seminar at this conference. So that's just one example of the ways in which we did some really cool projects through Dozer. And then after I was there for about 2.5 years, I took the opportunity for an internal transition over to the Center for Public Engagement. And so this has a much broader perspective. They work very closely with Dozer on that workshop and other efforts. But the center is looking at the goals of public engagement for scientists and society in a much larger perspective, but still thinking about culture and identity and everything else. So I helped facilitate workshops on science communication fundamentals and also how to do public engagement online. I managed an award. Majority of my time was spent on the AAAS Event Ambassador Program, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I was also the co-lead for the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee, the IDEA Committee, which also helped co-found at AAAS. So at the top is just a picture of me and two of my colleagues, Lila and Jamima, wearing our AAAS shirts. And we were presenting at the Inclusive SciComm conference. At the bottom, one of the things about being in a position like this is you get invited to be on a lot of panels, to participate in a lot of different projects. So most recently, the Religion News Association invited me to be on a panel with an Indigenous representative who was going to talking about how climate change is impacting their coastal community, and a reverend who is trying to mobilize religious communities to actually take action on climate change and work with Indigenous communities and have those communities be leads. And then I got to be the anthropologist who's talking about how we think about these things from an anthropological perspective, why land is important and sacred and not just interchangeable, and also best practices with SciComm. So you still get to participate in a lot of conferences, and if you want, you can do research and publishing, especially on things like public engagement and science communication, or whatever your specific area might be when you're working at these societies. Like I said, specifically, a lot of my time was taken up with the AAAS Event Ambassador Program. This was a highly selective program that had over 620 women apply, and we selected 125 of them to be role models to inspire the next generation, specifically targeting middle school girls. Research suggests that, girls and boys, when they're young, have equal interests and equal abilities in math and science, but around middle school, they're bombarded with a lot more of gender stereotyped ideas, and encountering that in the classroom and with colleagues and with parents and teachers. And girls start to lose interest and feel like they aren't supported. And so seeing themselves, there's research that representation, not just as seeing a woman in science, but a woman who looks like them in science, is really powerful for helping them see that that is a viable pathway still to them, so that they can make those choices based on what their interests are. So we used to have these 125 women. We got to do lots of really cool projects with them. The funder gave us over $1 million that I managed a small grants program to give out to our ambassadors, the application process, distributing it, making sure they turned in their final reports, having frequent meetings with them. Our team did all of that. I managed the professional development series, helped develop and match opportunities for ambassadors to do media opportunities or to do public engagement. We also organized a bunch of events like these public engagement activities. So most recently, if you've heard of us at all, we scanned 120 of our ambassadors. Not all of them could make it to the event that we did this at, but the 120 of them got scanned and turned into life-size 3D printed statues that were on display at the Smithsonian in the month of March. So we also organized a bunch of public engagement opportunities like tables with activities. So at the top, you see Dr. Sam Porter doing an archaeology activity with kids at the Smithsonian Arts and Industry Building. And then we also had like a big reception to celebrate all their statues were at these Smithsonian Institutes. So at the bottom, we had this huge event that the Smithsonian put on. And on the far right, you might notice Secretary Lonnie Bunch, who helped make it all happen from the Smithsonian end of things. So you get to do a lot of really cool things. At the top right, you can see me along with some of my team, the Center for Public Engagement, and in the background, those bright orange statues, those are our ambassadors. On the bottom, the Today Show covered it, and you can see me sort of circled in that circle. And in front of me, the little child with cat ears and a mask and a pom-pom is my daughter, who apparently decided this was going to be her 15 minutes. And every time she could, she got like right there in front of the camera. But she had a blast and it was cool to be a part of. In the middle, the top, I got to be part of supporting scientists doing going to Congress and doing congressional briefings, both in the Senate and the House. So I just took a stage photo behind one of the Senate podiums, but that was fun to see how that process happens. Like I said, I got to go to a bunch of conferences. So on the top left, that's me at ASHG, which is a human genetics conference where we did presentations and SciComm trainings. The bottom left, we had a big event with all of our ambassadors, and one of them is a CEO of an aquarium. And so she called in some favors because we were doing professional headshots and she wanted to have some live animals. So I got to meet a flamingo and hang out with it and pet it. They're kind of nibbly. And in the bottom middle, also I got to meet the former head of the American Episcopalian Church, who also has a PhD in biological evolution, specifically focused on the evolution of squid, I believe. So you get to do a lot of cool things, meet a lot of really interesting people, go around and do presentations and talk. But as of yesterday, I actually started a new job at the American Geophysical Union's Thriving Earth Exchange. So today's literally my second day, so I don't have any photos or any like big achievements yet, but it's a very cool project. The goal is to have communities identify or self-identify problems, and then they apply to be part of this program, and we find scientists to match them with who will volunteer to help them get the sort of hard quantitative data that is often needed to have that cultural capital to make arguments for change within their communities. So it gives them the toolkits to be able to make structural and powerful changes for things like, going to policymakers, going to the EPA and saying something has happened and proving it, starting a lawsuit, whatever it might be. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, I want to give you some tips on how to turn your CV into a resume. Please do not turn in a CV. It will get thrown in the trash because no one knows what it means outside of academia. You list a bunch of things that you wrote and some committees you were on. That doesn't tell anyone what you do. That doesn't tell anyone what your skill sets are. So it's really impossible for a hiring manager to evaluate that and figure out why you might be a good fit. So here are some suggestions. I know it's a lot of text. I won't go through all of it necessarily, or I won't read all the text on the screen, but there is a PDF of this that I've shared with the organizers. So they can share it with all of you. So don't feel like you need to frantically write any of it down. First, you want to think about how you can translate these different sort of experiences and skill sets into something appropriate for a resume. So you all have lots of communication skills, but you need to call that out explicitly that you have communication skills, that you write a lot, you also do presentations, you teach. So you write short and long form technical pieces. You might want to talk about how you communicate complex topics to lay audiences, like teaching about archaeology or human evolution to a bunch of 18-year-olds with hangovers. That's a skill set. Public speaking, all these pieces. And then for each of these, I had some examples of how you could take it to the next level if you want to like really focus on this part of your resume. But none of this is getting a second job. These are all like really easy, hopefully not heavy lift opportunity, ideas. So you could write a blog post explaining something in your field. You could do a Twitter or an Instagram takeover and show that you can do an institutional voice. You can volunteer to do public engagement, like at the Boston Museum of Science or a local library. So the ways in which you can really emphasize those communication skills. Also, grant writing. Nonprofits live and die on grants. And even if the job that you're applying for doesn't explicitly say grant writing is part of it or grant management, having some experience with it is really valuable because so much of what you do will be funded by grants. So you'll be still called in sometimes to review things, come up with ideas for grants, or just you have to know how the buckets of funding work and that kind of stuff. So any experience that you have with grants, spell that out in your resume because that's going to show that you get it and you have those toolkits. If you feel like this is an area where you're a little bit weak, you can offer your PI to help edit and write grants with colleagues or professors, and for any professors who are watching this, please give your students the opportunity to see how the sausage is made with grant writing. It is so valuable, and it is something that they can take with them anywhere. You can also start your own grant library. A lot of times, if you see a grant that looks interesting, if you go into the library, or if you go into like their archives, you can see who won it in past years. And if you email them, at least 50% of the time, people have been willing to share a copy of their grant narrative. And that's super useful to start building because then you can see, how do people articulate this? How do they make arguments for this? How is a federal grant really different from a private foundation grant? And how do I need to adjust my idea if I need to go from one to the other? Also, your research. A lot of times on a CV, it just says you did it. On your resume, you need to explain what that is. No one knows what anthropology really is or what we do. They have no idea the skill sets that you are bringing into the workforce. You have to explain it to them. So project management is really what many of you are ending up doing when you're doing your dissertation project. And in some ways, this is very different from some of the natural scientists that you may be competing with for these positions. A lot of my friends who were like geneticists, their advisor wrote a huge grant, and that grant included the ability to bring in grad students. So they were brought in by a grant that was already written, already funded, and they're kind of given like, here are 3 things you could work on in the lab that you didn't set up. In contrast, a lot of us are finding our own funding, developing our own project, and are pretty independent with how it's being run. So highlight that because, again, the hiring manager doesn't know that. So whatever you did, if you developed and ran your project, your budget, your schedule, try to quantitate things if you can, like how many interviews you did, how many hours of observations. Did you analyze your data independently? Did you use any toolkits for that? Do you know SPSS? Did you manage anyone? Even if they're volunteers who just pass out surveys or someone who helped haul dirt away from a dig site, if you manage someone, put it on there. Also, all the bureaucracy, NGOs, all those kinds of collaborations, that's useful too. If you want to take it to the next level or kind of emphasize things, learning a project management software system can be really valuable. I like Airtable because their free version lets you do a whole lot of stuff and it's very user friendly. So even if all you're doing is organizing your chore charts, for you and all your roommates on Airtable, just getting familiar with it so that you can confidently say in an interview that you know it can be really helpful. And maybe there's an opportunity, even if you're done with fieldwork, to be able to enlist some undergrads as volunteers that you can help. They can help you, they can get it on their resume that they helped code some transcripts or something like that. And that lets you also say that you helped guide, even if it was just volunteers. And lastly, like with ethnographic methods, even those of you who are more on the bio side, you still probably, unless things have changed drastically, had to take some courses in the cultural side. And that is a really big thing for a lot of science societies right now, because especially with what's happened over the past few years, they're realizing, yeah, we can't pretend that science is just, you know, some neutral space and it's just about how smart and driven you are. People in science are racist and sexist and ableist and classist and everything else. So they need to address those issues just like the rest of our society has to. And they're scrambling a little bit to figure out how to do that. We all have been trained, at least to a certain extent, much more so than many of my colleagues who are in these spaces. But one of the terms that has really come out, a phrase that's really popular right now from all the anti-bias training that people had to go through, is cultural humility. I was asked about this in my last interview to explain my approach to cultural humility. So it's a phrase that's useful to know, even if it doesn't come up in your interview, being familiar with these sort of concepts and perspectives. So what does it mean? It basically just means ethnocentrism is bad. It's saying that we need to recognize that our culture is not the end all be all, that other cultures are equally valid, and we need to set aside the idea that the way we do things is the right way or the best way. And if that sounds like the first day of Anthropology 101, you are correct. And what I think you can bring to this conversation is that you know what to do beyond that. Like, okay, so our culture isn't the best, but we still have to do something. We have to make decisions. We have to go somewhere. How do we do that in a way that isn't valuing one culture over another, but is still productive? Well, we have training in actually exactly how to do that. And we think about these things in a much deeper systemic way as well. So any experience you have with that, if you're cultural side, there's a ton you could say, but even if you are on the bio or arc side, you know, maybe you've done work with diverse communities abroad, put that down. You've lived in other cultures. You've had some training in these things, or just you can talk in an articulate way about these issues. So additional things you could do is writing a blog post about these sorts of topics. You can also volunteer to give some advice. There are a lot of nonprofits just in the Boston area that work with diverse communities and sort of seeing if you can give some even one-off kind of meetings. I did that when I was a grad student, and it was very rewarding, but it's also something that's nice to be able to say in an interview that you've done. And so my last thing is that anthropology really is your superpower. It's what puts you above a lot of the competitors for these positions, because we straddle that biosocial space so well that as a cultural anthropologist, I can still talk competently about science. And for my bioanth friends, they can still talk competently about culture and identity. And that is really rare to find in these spaces. So you're not just checking the box that you've gone through grad school because they just want someone with a grad degree. You actually have skill sets that are really hard to find and so useful. I apply my anthro degree every single day at my job. So you sometimes have to convince them, but you are definitely all really great candidates for jobs like this. All right, I've talked enough. I'm going to let Chris go, but if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat. Liminal Phase is my account on Twitter and some others too. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing so that Chris can go. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Taylor. I graduated in 2015 with my PhD, focusing on political and economic anthropology, which will come out a bit as I talk. So similar to Liz, actually, I think you're going to have a little deja vu because Liz said so many things quite well, a number of a number of them I'll repeat, but I think it's because they bear repetition. Similar to Liz, my talk's also organized. I'll tell a little about my history and career path and how I got here. As you saw in the title, I'm an anthropologist working in international affairs and foreign policy, meaning government, and beaming into you now from Washington, D.C. So happy to shed some light. Hopefully my talk shed some light on working for federal institutions and the U.S. foreign policy space, including international development like USAID and those types of things, for those of you that have questions about those. So going back to the beginning, I didn't anticipate being in this position at all. I currently work at the State Department managing a human rights fund for the Middle East. We give grants to everyone, women's rights activists or free speech groups and independent radio stations, or even technologies that build anti-censorship, technology groups that build anti-censorship software to get around governments that block the internet. I didn't anticipate being in this position at all, however, but if you go back to my career path, you can see a little bit about the skills I got along the way that brought me here. But I'll actually go back before my PhD to when I first graduated from college, or even in my final year of college. I was an undergrad anthropology major, and knew some people like my uncle and some of his colleagues in nonprofits that needed help grant writing. So as Liz said, nonprofits live or die on grants. They're always looking for help. Editing, writing sections, writing the data section, or like how we're going to collect data, which in the nonprofit world is called monitoring and evaluation. Why they don't just call it data collection, I don't know, but they call it monitoring and evaluation, or since government and nonprofit love acronyms, M and E. So I was doing a number of the grant writing tasks for a community development organization that was on private funding, but won their first grants from USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, in Afghanistan in 2003 and 4, soon after the first, the fall of the Taliban and the U.S. and coalition forces going in to do development projects. At that time, the nonprofit that I was doing some help grant writing for, just in my free time, I can't even remember if I got paid, senior year of undergrad, they won the USAID grant and basically looked around and said, oh shoot, we have nobody in Kabul to help manage this. We have to staff up very quickly, and asked me if I would come out to support the new, expatriate country director, deputy, and others. And so I ended up being 2 years there, working on that and a couple of the other grants that they received. Learned Farsi at that time, or Dari dialect in Afghanistan, and got much of my first field experience, which my undergraduate anthropology degree served me very well. I then went and worked in Washington, D.C. For another international development organization, supporting the field projects, right? So I was basically the DC person who helped write up the reports that the country teams in Bangladesh or Kosovo or Sri Lanka sent us, and met with the donor representatives. In this case, it was also USAID in many cases, to update them on the projects and see how things were going and keep those relationships alive on the Washington DC side. The inside the Beltway in Washington D.C., they call this backstopping, but it's actually a great way to get good experience in international development with nonprofits that receive large amounts of federal funding. I'm so sorry. I wanted to start out just by saying 4 things to just keep in your mind as I talk. Why do I think I jumped in too fast to tell you my story because I was so excited, and it's great to hear Liz's and everybody's. Let me just go back a little bit. When I finished my PhD, I met with the American Anthropological Association in Washington, D.C. This was in 2015, and was really surprised to find that in that year, that was the first year that more PhDs graduating were going into non-academic jobs than academic jobs, they said. I think they just crossed the threshold of 50% of what the AAA considers their members were going outside of academia. So I just want to say all of the things you're hearing from us right now are important for apparently like the vast majority of anthropology PhDs. And you're not alone, not only because there's 3 of us here on the screen right now, but just because our discipline, both inside and outside, is finally being recognized as having a lot of use outside of academia. And for some reason, I don't still know completely why. Like we didn't talk about that a lot during our grad training, right? We talk about how excited we are to be coming up with sort of the next theoretical update to, Saba Mahmood, and while that is really important, we can do both, right? We can walk and chew that bubble at the same time. We can make important contributions to theory, and we can important contributions in practice. And the National Association of Practicing Anthropologists recently also said out of 120 departments teaching PhD students, about 50% of their tenure track jobs are occupied by graduates of only 12 programs. I'm not just saying this to sort of dismay anybody, but like having a practicing option in your back pocket is important. So some things I'd like you to keep in mind while I talk before I dive back in my personal story, or the importance of getting field experience. Number one, getting experience sort of outside of your culture in what we call the field. Number one, is important to a lot of professions. Number two, learning about the public funding ecosystem, grant writing, especially. There's a lot of organizations that work on public funding, as Liz said too. Number three, leading a research study. When you finish your PhD, you will have single-handedly led your own research project. And as Liz also said, that is an important key skill. Four, the new-ish conversation about diversity and cross-cultural communication, especially like diversity and equity in hiring, is becoming more valuable, but I think it's useful in other ways. And then number five, and the one way it really has been sort of uniquely useful for me working in government and policy, are anthropologists understand political systems and systemic change in a way that almost nobody else does. And so when you're working in public policy and politics, an understanding of political structures, societal structures, and structural change have been invaluable. Okay, so field experience, public funding, leading research study, diversity, and systemic understanding of political structures. Okay, back to my story. Where was I? So I was working in DC, backstopping international development projects. And then I really did shift gears. Like I said, my family's part of the reason I got involved in international development and some of the first introductions I had. And I said, I don't want to do the family business. I'm going to go be an academic. Got my PhD in anthropology at Boston University and thought I had left behind international development for good. However, all through my PhD, about 7 years, I kept consulting to have some pocket money. If you don't have a side gig, I'm not saying you have to, but it is a nice thing to have on your resume for maintaining some hard skills that are not necessarily outside of academia, but that you can hone. What I was doing was working on a contract for USAID to be their data person, be their monitoring and evaluation person. So I had to read a bunch of websites that nonprofits had built for different foreign aid projects. Let me give you an example so you know. For example, there was a free speech and free media project in the Middle East, and so there was in the Farsi language, and so I had to read through the website and make sure that the content there was objective and reliable and the type of thing that the U.S. government would want to be funding for promoting a diversity of media. And I rated that and submitted my reports as part of my consulting gig alongside taking classes and other things. It wasn't a big lift, but kept me in touch. So even when I finished my PhD and was wrapping up my dissertation, one of the officers at USAID, who used to be at USAID, was now at the State Department, called me up and said, Chris, we're really looking for people to help manage human rights funds. We haven't had many people applying that both want to work in government and have interest in human rights and have a background in managing international development funds and have the right language skills. And so even though I wasn't looking for a State Department job, I did apply, and that's where I ended up. I think those are the key. Oh, let me tell you about a job opportunity that I thought I had that I didn't take, right? But I think is really illustrative. And this is what I call the write your own postdoc trick. As Liz was saying, many of your professors are working on external funding, like applying to the National Science Foundation, Templeton Foundation, National Endowment for the Humanities. A few of those funders, not many in anthropology because we work alone, a few of those funders fund team research projects. National Science Foundation is a big one. So I submitted a couple of these applications. I went to my advisor, multiple of my advisors, 3 actually, and said, you be the PI, I will write the whole grant, I will write the budget, I will write myself in it, and whatever university you're at, or we choose another university to affiliate with, if we win the grant, then the research center will basically have to make me a postdoc there because we already got my funding. And so you just get hired sort of almost automatically, and you don't have to wait for all these like poor, opportunities to come across your email that you don't get. So there's even a blog post I can try and dig up again where somebody applied to the National Science Foundation, did this, and he titles it Write Your Own Postdoc. And it's not that hard because you do have to know how to organize a research study. You have to think of something that your advisors would like, and you have to read the websites of the funders like Templeton Foundation or National Science Foundation. And it takes a lot of work to coordinate, especially with senior researchers and getting, their commitment and their time to co-write a grant proposal for you. But it is possible. And so in your final years of your degree, consider that like writing your own postdoc trick and see if you can apply for some team funding that includes you in it. That's great. I think just here at the end to close, I'm going to list a few relevant skills because look, we learn a lot of things in an anthropology PhD that we don't know how to name and we don't know what to call, and we don't know what to write on our resume. And nobody knows what anthropology is, in my experience, outside of academia. I don't really say I'm an anthropologist a lot, not because I'm embarrassed about it, but just because people think you're running around looking for bones like Indiana Jones. So first and foremost, obviously, research and analysis, like how to organize a research question. This is sort of just like logical thinking. I have found this skill to just serve me very well, like dissecting an argument, whether it's a policy memo, whether it is somebody else's grant proposal that I'm expected to fund, how to organize and frame, or whether it's somebody doing like an evidence-based policy recommendation. You can dissect their argument based on data. 2, investigation, meaning like investigative journalism. I don't think we talk about this enough in anthropology either, but there is a professional skill that is basically what anthropologist David Gellner called deep hanging out. And like on your fieldwork, just you had a beat. Like you would go down to the police station, if you're doing criminological ethnography, you would go down to the mosque, if like me, you're an anthropologist of Islam, and just hang out and wait, for your data to happen in front of you. That's what journalists do. And that's what State Department officials do at the embassies when they're trying to write diplomatic cables. They go to conferences, they sit there and they try and interview people that are in their area, that are in the, groups that they have to listen to, whether it's business community, civil society community, or journalists. They do deep hanging out or investigation. So research analysis, investigative journalism. Number 3, like sort of like writing and presentation. This is kind of obvious, but like you'd be surprised how many people don't know how to write in the real world. And going along with that, like public speaking, like our seminars force us to present conference papers to each other in class so that we know how to present in the conference. And again, you'd be surprised how many people don't have good oral presentation skills, but how far that gets you sometimes. Actually, so most importantly, languages. I haven't gotten a job yet where I think the main reason I got hired is because I speak sort of an odd language, Farsi, Urdu, Hindi, one of those. Each of them have been crucial. database management or other hard skills. This I wanted to point out because often in the course of doing your fieldwork, a colleague of mine worked on patent law. Like in the course of doing your fieldwork, you're going to interact with other professions. I know people that have done ethnography and banking. You end up with some skills, and go ahead and pursue that. Like our colleague Sarah Tobin, who graduated from Boston University, went ahead and got a certificate in Islamic banking. Not like she's used it yet, I don't think, maybe she has, but like take opportunities to get a professional skill or learn a lot about a professional industry and other hard skills. Could be something like database management you're doing already as a researcher or data analytics, but it could be something else like Liz was talking about, learning technology platforms or getting other professional certifications. One of my advisors referred to the anthropology PhD as a poaching license because we literally study like any aspect of human behavior. They meant we poach on other social science disciplines, but I'd extend that to say we poach on a lot of professions, and can gain their skills during like the 7 to 10 years we spend on our PhD. So don't forget those hard skills. And then the last one I wanted to highlight, we haven't talked about. So market research and like marketing ethnography is huge. There's a conference called EPIC. You can type it into Google, or EPIC. And I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically the marketers, meaning people that sell stuff to people and do advertising, that think that you should use ethnography and not just like economic methods in market research. And for example, there was a long form New Yorker article about the anthropologist that helped sell Smirnoff. So there were some ethnographers that literally went to parties with college kids and came up with Smirnoff's branding strategy about how to sell vodka. Regardless of what you agree about that goal, it's a real skill. So that's what I have. Those are some of the hard skills I think I got over the years. And if there are large sort of categories that I think really help us sell, it's not showing up and saying I'm an anthropologist, but saying I have field experience, going back to the first 4 things I mentioned. I know about public funding ecosystems, grant writing, and public policy goals. Third, I led a research study. I didn't talk about this a lot, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop. But you basically managed a small offshore project by the end of your PhD. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You may have even had like a research assistant there or two, or at least you worked with people that helped you with translations, some sort of advisors and consultants. And you had to stick to deadlines, you had to produce deliverables and a product at the end. And then you had to market it to the world because nobody reads your dissertation. You have to go to conferences and sell it to them. Oh, and I forgot to mention you won investors, right? You at least had to tell your committee why you deserve the funding, or maybe even you're accountable to what are basically, the venture capitalists of academia that gave you the funding in the first place to produce your product. So you have a lot of chops if you finish your PhD study in how to do project management and lead your study all by yourself. And I didn't talk about this as much, but yeah, I run like the diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocacy subcommittee in my office at the State Department, and boy, are they hurting for not having like white. The joke in the State Department is everybody is pale, male, and Yale for decades, and they really need people who understand the go figure the cultures and the foreign populations that the U.S. government is interacting with more than they currently do, and I can't say how much of a priority that is for us there. And apologies, last I didn't talk about it as much for this, but feel free to ask me in the questions. You don't need a PhD to do my job. You can do it with a bachelor's, be a foreign affairs officer managing a human rights fund. But the fact that I have a PhD in understanding political systems, social change, is invaluable. Like the problems that we have to analyze and tell our State Department leadership we're going to solve based on a limited amount of data about a foreign population are just a part of my job every day. And so being able to make complex arguments and understand things from the 30,000 foot level, but then talk about it in plain English is crucial. Thanks, everyone. I'll turn over to Chloe and looking forward to your questions at the end.
All right, and everyone hopefully can hear me, and let me share my screen now. And hopefully you guys will all see a nice screen for us there about optimizing. No, yes, success. Okay, cool. All right, great. So I am going to give a very different talk than my two colleagues, and that is because I am in a very different realm. I am Chloe, and I actually did my PhD right beside both Liz and Chris. So we went through the same process at the same time, but I ended up in a very different destination, and I currently work in the startup realm. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey. I am a political anthropologist, but I really specialize in religion, and I've traveled all over the world to attend religious rituals and participate in religious ceremonies. I'm particularly interested in what people have faith in, and so that can be having faith in a political leader or having faith in a religious practice. But what that means is I've always studied what people get really passionate about, what causes them to make rash decisions, what causes them to get excited or attentioned. I just studied it in an academic context and have since had to learn how to apply that in a new space. Now, I wanted to be a university professor ever since I was a little girl. I wanted to be Indiana Jones, but especially that scene where he was teaching at the University of Chicago and all the students were enraptured with him. So I went into academia to train to be an academic, and I was very, very excited about that prospect. But I missed the postdoc boat. I was not able to secure a postdoc after finishing my PhD in 2015. I moved to the New York City area, which you would think is a huge job market, but I really struggled to find my place in academia. I was a very successful adjunct. I greatly enjoyed the adjuncting process. I really liked working with students. I really enjoyed teaching. But adjuncting is a demoralizing process. You are not connected into the department. You don't have financial or career security. You don't feel a long-term trajectory to your career. It interrupts with your research, and it makes it very hard to build yourself as an academic when you're adjuncting 4+ courses a semester and struggling to pay your bills. So as a result, I decided to stick with my dream of being a professor, but make money on the side as a freelance consultant. And I actually got into freelance consulting through another member of our anthropology department, Chelsea Shields. She's the one originally who introduced me to the concept of freelance consulting. And I freelance consulted for a variety of different companies, individuals, international organizations, governments, etc. Freelance consulting provided me with an alternative to adjuncting where I could still do the teaching that I really enjoyed, but I could afford to do it and pay off my student loans and all of that, while also giving me a lot of flexibility. And so the more that I freelanced, the less I had to teach in terms of paying my bills. And so that allowed me to take heavier or lighter workloads as an academic, and gave me some of the flexibility, the ability to choose my own projects, and of course, better pay that came with being a freelance consultant. One of the things that I want to point out is that I didn't make the jump from academia into freelance consulting like easily, and it was definitely an iterative process, and I didn't make the jump into startups easily. It was never a career that I expected to have. So for 3 years, I consulted through Upwork. I consulted as a private individual and worked with, again, international organizations. I helped plan some of the COVID response for one of the Gulf nations. I worked with major corporations to do some of the diversity and inclusivity stuff that my colleagues were talking about there. But over the course of 3 years, I was able to build a strong consulting portfolio. Everything from reviews to networks, samples, as well as working on my own skills by taking coursework and just getting experience. And I brought with me a very strong educational background, just like all of us. We have, our undergrad degrees, our PhDs, masters, grants that we have associated with us, that kind of thing. So I was bringing that with me along with the portfolio. One of the things that I think is really important if you're working in the startup community as an anthropologist is we know how to snowball sample. We know how to start with one group and kind of through their social networks build our community. That is what you have to do as a freelance consultant. That is what you have to do in the startup community when you're looking for venture capital funding. You've got to be able to build that network of professional clients, and knowing how to snowball sample. It's like just another round of the game. You run that same process, but you're using it to build up a professional clientele. And by 2020, by the COVID experience and the Trump presidency, I was done with working in academia because I wanted to be able to have more of an impact on the world. And academics have a lot of impact, but adjuncts don't. You don't get the platform, you don't get the traction, you don't get the publication attention. So for me, I was looking for a way to do more. I was eventually bought out by one of my clients. And so I serve today as a consigliere. I am a right-hand man of a wealthy multipreneur. My boss runs at any given time 4 to 6 companies, which he has either founded or invested in. And my responsibility is to serve as his advisor. So I do personal financial and investment advising, look at decks, take pitches. I write business plans and help ideate startups. So we actually build companies together. I do a lot of brand advising for his personal brand, as well as the brands that are within his portfolio. And I serve as his professional strategic advisors. So developing 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans for how we want to expand his portfolio, develop his investments, etc. What this means is I do a ton of writing, I make a lot of decks, I do research, and I do a lot of amplifying what other executives do. So I amplify brainstorming, ideation, develop company processes, take other people's visions and help magnify them to turn them into business opportunities. For those of you who maybe want like a colloquial explanation, if you're familiar with like the Batman universe, in my company, I'm often called Lucius Fox as a nickname. So my job is to sort of run the behind the scenes while the hero goes and saves the day. So what we do is we build purpose-driven companies, and that's part of why I love working in startups. So what is it like working in startups? And part of what I want to do is pitch to you guys the idea of working in the startup community as opposed to other alternatives. When I got out of academia, my idea was, oh, okay, if I'm not going to work in academia itself, maybe I could go into business, maybe I could go into corporate, maybe I could go into finance. But startup is its own unique thing. The startup community is very Silicon Valley, LA. It is a place for the rebels. When I first told my thesis advisors, and Chris and Liz will probably laugh at this, when I first told them that I left academia and I went into the startup world, they both said, wow, we're not surprised, you always were a free spirit. And that's why startups are really exciting for a lot of academics. What we do in startups is we come up with a crazy idea, we get some data, some proof of concept, we put it together, and then we pitch it to a committee to get a bunch of money from them. And if they approve the project, then we build it out and execute it. I haven't just described getting your dissertation done, I've also described building a company. And so that same kind of can-do, almost rebellious, like I can come up with my own independent research project, move to some foreign country, learn the language, put it all together and get a book out of it and pitch it to somebody to sell it. That's the startup world. So the translation from academia to startup, you would think it's a big jump, but it's actually less of a jump, I feel, than moving from academia to corporate or finance or something like that. You're moving into a community of really smart people who want to come up with really creative ideas and then pitch them to somebody who will pay them for them. And then hopefully build them out and make the world a better place. That's the second reason to work for startups. I think a lot of us love academia and we love the promise of solving problems problems that matter to us, problems that are moral. And that's something you get to do in a startup, because you're not joining a big corporation with its own morality, because you're building a company from the start. You are directly engaged with the morality of that company, with the purpose of that company, with the kind of products that it builds. And so that allows you to take the anthropological sensibilities that you have gained through your field research and your experience and turn those into products people buy. Turn those into apps and services and software that people use. If you see a problem in the world as an academic, go find some rich people, build a company and solve it. That's what we do in the startup community, right? So we are very problem and solution oriented. And then the third reason to be a PhD and go into the startup world, or to be even with a bachelor or a master's from a great educational background, you have worth in the startup community. You are respected, your expertise are respected, your writing skills are respected, because startups are lean, they're small, they have small staffs. So everybody's skills are elevated and necessary and important. So you can bring all of your different expertise in together, and that's going to make you really powerful in a startup in a way that it doesn't work in like corporate or other settings. So that's why I love the startup world. You get to be rebellious, you get to be right on the frontier and the edge, and you get to build things that matter. And then you get the respect and the pay that goes with it. So how do you get started in startups? Exactly the same thing Liz and Chris said. You got to write. You got to write. The number one skill that I see lacking from top people in startups, where companies fail, where like they had a great idea and they should have been able to execute, they can't get funding because all their materials are poorly written. They can't get funding because they don't know how to do a good deck and good speeches and actually present materials well. I see people fail in doing copy and doing marketing. All of this comes from an inability to write. One of my strengths that I bring to all of the companies that I work on is that I produce thousands of words within a day, within 2 days, right? Being able to create large amounts of writing briefs, writing reports, writing plans in rapidity, like that is a secret that startups need, because startups are constantly pivoting and adjusting. But there are other things that you can do to develop yourself as a startup asset. First of all, you got to build that portfolio, written work, get those references, make yourself a reputation. Now, when you do this, you're going to be networking with all sorts of creatives. As an academic, I went to academic conferences. As soon as I started working in the startup world, I was hitting up my alumni associations, all of these different professional organizations, so that I could network with other like-minded, intelligent, creative individuals. And then most importantly, and Liz and Chris both touched on this, you want to pick up some of these tools that are used in the startup realm, in the nonprofit sector, productivity tools, communications tools, some of these technical tools, Asana and Notion and Airtable, project management, tools that allow you to communicate with the business world that's already using these tools. Now, your question might be, in the startup world, there's a lot of different lingo for the different departments. They don't match up really well with like corporate. They don't match up really well with academia. So how do I know what skills to get in the first place? How do I know what softwares to look at? How do I know any of that? So what I've done is I've broken down kind of 5 skill set areas that I think are really important for startups, that are really important for us academics as well, to show you where that crossover happens. So for example, if you are really good at being a professor, you've got strong communication skills, you know how to run a research project, you know how to like run a team of independent researchers, you are good at workshopping and ideating, you're good at grant writing, deck making, all of these professorial skills, you are going to be a pro at fundraising, at creating those decks. And I regularly make decks that we take out to try to raise $10 million on, $50 million on, and it's using the same sets of skills as trying to present an esoteric theory to a 19-year-old that's like half hungover. You still got to grab their attention, have something eye-catching. You already have these skills. So fundraising is something that we academics actually do really, really well. We are also great in product for things like research and development, because we can ideate new projects. We are great in operations because we are really good at developing the processes. If you know how to write a syllabus, if you know how to write an assignment, You know how to write a process brief for an operations in a startup. Let's say that you are strong at demographics, you're great at statistics and analytics, you know how to read long-term trends. We as anthropologists, we're the people who know people. That is an incredibly die-for skill in the startup community, in marketing, in analytics and branding. Chris was talking about this a little bit, but there's a more and more of a trend of market research recognizing that you need ethnographic, you need survey, you need people who can actually do interviews and talk to people. Oh, and by the way, in their native language. All of these skills can be brought to marketing departments in corporate and especially in startups. And especially if your startup is oriented towards a specific community. Let's say that you're one of the companies that we work for produces rape kits that are provided to women on college campuses. Having academics who are subject matter experts in gender strengthens that startup. So if you're good at demographics, bring those expertise with you to the right startup and you will be a really powerful testimonial and expert leader for your company. If you are strong at ideation, so this is what I get paid a lot of money to do, to not only think creative thoughts, but to work with people who are creative and entrepreneurial and all over the place and to help them get their ideas in line. If you are good at workshopping, there's a place for you in the startup realm because you are able to take lots of people with their different ideas and pull it together into one coherent argument. That is gold in the startup community. So ideation is something that I do on a regular basis. And that means I'm great for product in leadership and design. I help create new products and new ideas, but I also shepherd other people's creative processes. And then again, all that marketing is taking a vision and adding it to the right demographics, and that is a successful marketing campaign. So if you are good at ideating and you understand a target audience, you are very powerful in marketing. Let's say that you are strong with technology and data. This is going to be especially for the biological anthropologists, the archaeologists who have had to work with big data sets. Big data sets are very powerful, but they're also like, a lot of us had to actually write our own code or like mess around to get our specific data to be presented or organized the way that we want to. That kind of experimentation with a little bit of skill development makes you great for dev tech, right? Development of technology. And so being an analyst, being a coder, a lot of these skills require someone who not only has the technical skill, but knows how to apply it in a real world situation. And that's what our PhDs have given us, that practical view of specialized tech. Liz also talked about this a little bit, but project management. If you are good with technology and data and you've worked with teams, if you are able to translate creative into tech talk for tech people, if you are able to bridge that gap, that is how you bring disparate sections of a startup together and become successful. And then finally, if you are good at process and leadership, if you're good at running research teams, if you're good at organizing your students or grad students, a lot of the stuff that Liz described that you would put on your resume, these are the kind of skills that startups and companies need to run project management in both product and dev, and even to be in operations, to lead companies, ensuring a company vision, creating company culture. So if those are the kind of skills you have, start honing them the last few years of your graduate degree. Start honing them your junior, senior year of your bachelor's. Start freelancing, build up that portfolio. The first couple of years, I did not make that much money because I was taking work that was going to build a portfolio, that was going to show my diversity, to show my different skills. So focusing on that kind of thing in the background, building up that portfolio over time so that when you graduate, you are ready to jump into the shark pond, essentially, because that's what I do. I hang out with a lot of sharks and we build a lot of companies. You can start honing those skills before you end your degree. And then that way you can make that transition more easily. I wish I had done that. I instead had kind of like a 3 or 4 year lag before I got to where I'm at. If you have any questions, you can email me. We're also taking questions after this. I'm very excited to hear if anybody has any questions about the startup realm. It's a very, very different experience than I think Liz and Chris have had. Yeah, definitely not where I expected to be. If you asked me 5 years ago, if I was going to work in startups, no, never would have known it. And now it is absolutely incredibly fulfilling and fun. Yeah. Oh, Slack. Yes, we love Slack. We love Slack. We love Asana. We love Notion. It's all fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I mean, I honestly feel so empowered about being an anthropologist right now, and I'm basically in academia permanently, but it's so amazing to think about all the skills that we get that could be valuable out there in the world solving problems. So thank you all so much. I'm gonna open it up. I have a ton of questions if nobody else does. I will just turn over the floor to anybody who's interested in asking a question. You can ask a question in the chat.
While you're thinking of your question too, you could type in like a little about your background and interests that you have either in your current studies or a skill that you have outside of academia, and then we can better tailor some of our comments to the audience here.
Did anyone have a question? I thought I saw Jessica. Did you have one?
Yeah, I have lots of questions, but sorry if my Wi-Fi cuts in and out. I'm currently in Cambodia in the middle of my dissertation research, so Wi-Fi here is lots of fun sometimes.
Amazing.
But I had a question. I'll give you a little bit about my background, so hopefully maybe it can help tailor a little bit, which is what you're asking for, Chris. I graduated with my master's degree in anthropology and education in 2016 and started to try and get into like education nonprofit worlds and like trying to like dive into that space because I'm really passionate about education and the changes that happen within education and how education is being leveraged as a change maker in society, which is also part of what I'm doing my dissertation research on, how university education is perceived as changing people's trajectories in life and into adulthood, as well as their employment and career paths. So all connected in that kind of way. But one of the things that I commonly came up against in that transition from my master's into that nonprofit space, I was in New York City at the time, was constantly having people say, well, you have too many degrees. I had a master's degree in anthropology and education, like I said, and I had previously been a teacher with Teach for America, and so I had a master's degree from that. And so people constantly told me, well, you don't have the right skills, and we don't want to hire you because you don't have the right skills, but you're also overqualified for the positions that you're applying for, which would provide me the skills. So I was wondering how to kind of manage that discussion in an interview space more particularly, but also how we can kind of manage that as we're leaving academia. Like maybe we didn't get all of those opportunities to like build ourselves in the way that what we're now intending to go down in our career paths. How can we kind of navigate those disconnects in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, when I was applying, I definitely got asked a lot, are you sure you really want to leave academia? And I think they were afraid that I was doing what, to be honest, I was doing a little bit, which was like, let's see how non-academia works and maybe I'll still apply for postdocs for the next round of things, you know? And I just had to convince them that there was a really compelling reason. And often in the nonprofit sector, that can be mission driven, right? So, you know, for me, I could talk about how one of the things that I'm passionate about is that anthropology, you know, we study really, really important topics, things that I think are vital, like education policies. You know, I was working with a heavily marginalized Black immigrant community and how they're navigating race and identity and, you know, poverty and things like that. And no one reads our stuff. And we're almost de-incentivized from doing public engagement about it. And I felt like that was not only something that, you know, was frustrating, but I felt it was deeply unethical that we would have all this knowledge and that we're taking it sort of like a leech from all these communities and then not doing anything with it. And so one of the reasons that I really wanted to go into these nonprofit sectors was to be able to actually apply it and do something with it. And I think if I could talk compellingly about why this mattered so much, That was something that was really useful. I put this earlier in the chat, but something I'm going to pitch to you that I'm not there anymore. This is not because of my job at AAAS, but we have the Science, Technology, and Policy Fellowship, and they never have enough anthropologists or social scientists who apply. And they seriously, I was on the selection committee and they often are like, okay, look, I know this person might not be as strong, but we need a social scientist in this cohort. That's apply. You have to have your degree in hand, but they place you either, and the executive side is also easier to get into, by the way. So places like the State Department is one of the places you can be, USAID, all these kind of cool places. But also you could go congressional, legislative if you preferred. But you spend a year there, they pay you between $75,000 and $95,000, and they give you health insurance, and you get all this professional development, and you actually get a job in the US government, and a lot of those turn into actual real careers. And so it's a nice way when you feel like, and they're looking for PhDs. The whole point is they're putting PhDs with science, both natural and social science backgrounds, into these positions because we want more scientists in government. And so that's something that once you have that on your resume, you've already opened the door, and it's a lot easier to keep walking through. I'll let Chloe and Chris.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give, since I'm coming from the startup realm, I'm gonna give a wildly different answer that hopefully is not counterproductive, because I definitely don't mean it to be. I have found in my experience in the startup realm, everybody knows why I left academia. Everybody is shocked that academics don't leave sooner. In the startup realm, we generally assume that academics are missing out on opportunities to actually impact the world. So I've never been told I have too many degrees, but my boss calls it the Ivy League bonus, and I actually get paid more than some of my coworkers just because I have extra degrees. I get paid a PhD bonus. Because he can trot out my PhD as a qualification that his consigliere has. So as long as you don't have an MBA is considered the kiss of death. Actually, that's the only degree you do not want in the startup realm is a MBA. Everything else is considered a perk. And so people that my degrees have gotten me farther in the startup realm. But similarly to what Liz was talking about, in our realm, we have incubators that, give you that kind of leadership training. There are programs that you can put yourself through that give you some of that skills. But a lot of it, and this is true in startup, and I also think in nonprofit and government as well, is you start with a certain set of experience and you are expected to get a lot of it on the job, and you are expected to figure out things as they go along and develop skills. And so if you don't have certain skills on your resume, showing a flexibility, an ability to learn, an ability to pivot, an ability to be a jack of all trades, master of none is still better than a master of one, right? To never forget that philosophy and to show that in your interviewing, that's, I think, something that allows you to say, look, I don't have all the skills because I'm coming from academia into this space. I bring other valuable skills, but don't worry, those skills I don't have, I'm obviously smart. I'll learn them. And I'm obviously smart, I'll learn it is a line you will use in, to make up for experience you don't have. But that's part of what you are showing, is that you have that ability to pivot. So yeah, there are places to go get those skills, and you will always continually have to get new skills, especially in technology. So even if you're I don't have all of these skills, it's okay, none of us do. We're all faking it till we make it. We're all, yeah, do a lot of hand gesturing. Yeah.
I thought that was a great question, Jessica. It is hard. And actually, I think you're already across the line because you're getting interviews, first of all. My wife has spent her whole career in international development, and there was one transition between jobs. She sent 200 resumes before she got the job. And I'm not trying to demoralize people, but it is just keep at it, maybe try and pick as narrow, one sector as you can and really develop the skills in that so that you can answer the question. There's a sector I'm going for. I clearly have these skills, or at least I've learned to talk about my skills in the way that we're talking. Because a lot of times you already do have some of the skills, or you can at least, you're just looking for the right words in the interviews that like Chloe in particular is saying. And then second, I think this is like a less popular option for you, but like many of us got into this by consulting first and then going full-time, right? So like doing the consulting and not trying to apply for the full-time job will definitely actually get you the skills to show you can actually do the work part-time, and then you go full-time, like in my case, literally for the same person that I was consulting earlier. Third, informational interviews are huge in Washington, D.C., and I can't remember what other job markets. You just email people cold, and you like, if you're getting interviews, great. You already have like a good sense of what the company wants. If you don't, and you're not sure how to talk about your skills in the interview so that they understand, email somebody. I'd like to buy you coffee. I'd like to have a virtual coffee. They will accept. Like, you'd be surprised how many people will respond to a 2-sentence email that says, here's my 2-page resume attached. I think what you do is fascinating. I'd like to go out to coffee with you. People love talking about themselves. People love just like saying, yeah, and then I hate my job for this reason, but I actually think it's really cool and inspiring. And you can have someone for half an hour, and in the course of that, you get what like an inside look at what that company is like. That's my shtick.
Yeah, I will also say, to back up Chris there, if you are interested in startups or anything like that, and you are a woman and you ping a woman who is an executive in a startup and you say, hey, I am looking for a mentor, I am looking for advice. I do not know a C-suite executive woman who will turn down that opportunity to mentor a younger woman. Like, all of us at the C-suite level are looking for ways to pay it like forward for what we got paid from our mentorships. So especially it is really important for young women starting their careers to find older, more experienced female mentors in the industry, whether that's nonprofit, whether that's startup, whether that's corporate, like wherever it is. But Chris is absolutely right. If you send them a message and say, hey, I want to buy you a coffee and learn about how to be like, you know, a bad bitch, pardon my language, like in a professional sense, that like they will absolutely pay it forward and give you like real insight.
Yeah, the one other thing I was going to say really quick before Samantha, I know you have a question, but I was going to add networking is just super valuable, just in general. Just getting to know people, like, you know, Chloe and Chris have said, just go out, meet people, go to conferences, all these applied anthropology, there's education spaces, pretty much all the jobs that I've gotten, including AAAS, including AGU, and then the higher level, like the much further along, like they want to fly me out to interview positions where I've actually had to turn them down because I took another job. Like a Data and Society, National Geographic, and places like those. Those are all networking that like, and they will vouch for you. Oh, Jessica is fantastic, and she does really want this. Like, and that if that's part of your problem, getting over that hurdle, if you have someone on the inside who is telling the hiring committee that you're all good, that also is really helpful. Samantha, you have had your hand up for a while.
Yes, thank you. So I noticed, I guess this is mainly for Liz and Chris, I noticed in both of your presentations, you talked about experience that helped you that came outside of the anthropology PhD program, whether that was Liz talking about like working with communications people or that science merch thing, or Chris talking actually about like experience in undergrad and then outside consulting. And so I'm wondering, does that then pose any issues, I guess, especially for what Chris was talking about, this job that isn't like inherently them looking for anthropology PhDs, as opposed to Liz, where it seems like they are like, I want anthropology PhDs. You know, how do you sell that having an anthropology PhD is so valuable, but then at the same time, a lot of those skills that you're highlighting, or those kind of like ways in to those positions, came outside of the anthropology PhD program? I know you've talked all these great things about how to, you know, rework CVs for resumes, but I'm just wondering, does that still kind of create a conflict in interviewers' minds or whatever?
Liz, you want to go first?
Sure. I'd say that most programs, even ones that are aimed at popping you right into industry right out of your PhD, they still expect that you're going to do internships, that you're going to have relationships, that you're going to do consulting or something like that. And that's what's going to build your resume. That, like my uncles and a lot of my family are in the much more natural science side of things, like chemical engineering and that kind of thing. And none of them get jobs in industry without having done projects and work that were outside of their PhD. That's just sort of expected. And so anthropology, because there's so little focus on that applied piece, we don't have the opportunities that a lot of people who are in much more industry focused PhDs get. But a lot of the jobs that you're going to be applying for, that's not unusual to them, that you would have these additional pieces, because the people who are coming in who have chemistry PhDs or who have genetics PhDs, they've all done consulting. They've all done, like these side projects and these side gigs. So, and internships and other kinds of things. So for them, they're sort of expecting to see it on your resume to a certain extent. And they don't really, I think, ever see it as a conflict. And it does help, like anytime you're applying to a job, to show that you can do additional things. I think having, like Chris said, those hard skills, being able to show that you know how to do a job that's not academia, can be helpful. And what I mean by that is just some of the basics, like clocking in and clocking out at certain times, being able to have specific instructions and, working with a boss or with a team. Those kinds of things are important skill sets. And frankly, there are a lot of things that like a real HR would never let fly that can fly in academia. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But like knowing how to be professional and not harassing or bullying and those kinds of things. Showing that you have worked in a professional space where those kinds of things absolutely cannot fly. And this is not shade on our department. Our department was good, but I have been in previous departments, like for my master's, that were awful when it came to this sort of thing. And it is helpful, I think, for them to see that you know how to behave in a professional space and that you weren't fired by a functioning HR. Chris, did you want to add to that?
Just that you were really perceptive, and calling me out that I didn't have the extra skills outside of PhD. I do think, whether this is good or bad news, the anthropology PhD itself is not a credential to another job, all by itself. But what I was trying to say is that what I learned in undergrad as an anthropology student, I knew better as a doctoral student. Grant writing, research and analysis, and data collection and presentation were three important things. A guy in my office is an anthropology PhD, and he is our data guy. He was hired as the data guy, what we call the monitoring and evaluation specialist, to collect data on the projects and present it. And an anthropology PhD is his actual primary credential for that. So I think it helps to do what Liz is saying, get some outside skills. So you show up saying I have an only. Second, remember all your volunteer experiences. I mean, this is sort of more generic resume advice, but like trying to, Liz, am I correct? You were the Reddit moderator as like a volunteer position, right?
Yeah, you're not allowed to be paid for it. And then March for Science, March for Our Lives, like all the other kind of like advocacy and activist stuff I did was volunteer. But being able to say that I was helping run a group and, that kind of thing, that's still something that goes on the resume.
And no anthropology PhD is only an academic. You're an activist, right? So like I manage a human rights fund. One thing I do look for in people I hire, project officers, is, do you have familiarity in certain areas of human rights promotion, political advocacy, work with international organizations like the UN, work with like domestic civil rights groups. Just highlighting those additional skills that you already have that are for articulate is unfortunately, I think, the most I can say.
I think we have one last question before we wrap up, was resources for finding consulting gigs for bio and probably for culture too. And we have one, Upwork is one option, but I didn't know if kind of round things out if you want to throw any other out there.
That's a great question. And the unfortunate thing in my experience is that people hire consultants based on networking and personalistic networks, and people get consultancies based on the same. I'm sure there are great databases and other things out there, and I will put some more in the chat, but going to conferences and networking in that field, I think, is the best way to get leads.
All right, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording now.